she sits me down and she says that she needed to tell me something. Now I'm in the third grade, y'all, and she's like, I just want you to know that I can't read or write. And I'm looking at her like, what? And she said, and so, and I'll never forget this. And she said, so I'm going to need you to help me do my business. Like, I always say that, I write because my mother couldn't. And I just really mean that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Daughter's Inheritance. I'm your host, Susan Seal, and I'm happy that you are coming along with us today. So I was recently at a national conference in Boston, and I had several people that came up to me and said, I'm enjoying your podcast. Well, I immediately thought that it was the podcast we do at work, because this was a conference on online education, continuing education, adult learners, and our podcast at work is on higher ed. But after they said, I'm enjoying your podcast, they started telling me about their mother. And I was like, oh, that one. So I just wanted to say I appreciate all of you listening wherever you are and for sharing your favorite episodes. And I think today I'm looking forward to it and think it might be one of your favorite episodes. And I think you're going to find it fascinating. My guest today is Donna Ladd, and she is co-founder and editor of the statewide Mississippi Free Press and the Jackson Free Press, and is the director and founder of the Mississippi Youth Media Project. And really, she's just a big deal in terms of investigative journalism in the state of Mississippi. So we'll get into some of her areas as we talk. But Donna, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So I was listening to a podcast the other day that you did in Chicago, and it was about political issues and how many Americans don't know a lot about our American history. And that is exacerbating some of our issues today. But our focus today is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about your mother. And I met you a couple of years ago, I think now, at the Starkville Rotary Club. And I was fascinated right then by your overall story, but also about your mother and our connection to Philadelphia.
That's right.
Because not only are we both from Philadelphia, but we grew up on the same road.
Wow.
So did your mother grow up on the Fort? Did she grow up in the Fort community as well, or did she move from somewhere else?
No, she and my dad really kind of, separately, obviously, grew up in Dixon.
Okay.
In fact, I always say, I don't know if I would actually call it this, but when I get around to writing a memoir, which I plan to do at some point, I want to name it Dixon because it's such a complicated, interesting place down there. But yeah, when my people came into Mississippi, most directly from Alabama, they came into that Dixon area and then down around Sebastopol.
Neither, for those people that aren't from around here, neither of those are very far from Philadelphia.
No, they're not. It's a small area, that's for sure.
Yeah, my grandmother was from Kemper County in DeKalb, so not far away either. What was her relationship like with her parents? What was her younger years like growing up?
Well, my mother was the only daughter of several, and had several brothers, I think five. And, she was illiterate, as you know, but she also came from a literate family and parents. And, my grandfather, and her name was Coates. So my grandpa Coates, whom I never met, he died when I was very young, I think, didn't really believe in education. And a lot of people, a lot of sharecroppers, a lot of, of people of that time didn't. My other grandfather, my dad's dad, didn't really believe in education either. But, they would let the boys go to school, to those big one room Dixon school back down where they were. They'd let the boys go sometimes through third grade, if that, so that they learn to read and write enough, or do figures as they called it, so that they could function. They could help with whatever the business was, if it was just selling extra cotton, then they could add it
They
up, that
needed to
kind of
know
thing.
that just for what they were doing.
That's
So
right.
yeah.
Just the sheer basics, right? But with girls, that wasn't always the case. And so with my grandpa, he kept my mother home from school and didn't let her she never went to school a day in her life until literacy classes, which is really what my guardian piece is about that I did
Hmm.
about my mother. But he would basically kept her home to cook. She was a really good cook, and
Hmm.
maybe this is
Hmm.
why, but she cooked for the people working in the fields. And I think that was a common thing for girls at the time, right?
Hmm.
And then my grandfather, by all, stories that I've heard, was probably abusive and very difficult. So my mother, kind of long story short, but she ended up marrying my dad when she was 14 or 15, I think it was, 14, 15, in the middle of a road at Frog Level, which you
Frog
might,
Level Road. Yeah, I
you
know
might,
where that
yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. There, I know. I loved. I want a sign that says Frog Level because that's in many ways that's where I descend from
Uh-huh.
is Frog Level, not Fork Road. But anyway, she told me later on she got married in the middle of the road so that nobody could stop them. I don't know if that's really true, but I wouldn't be. I mean, I don't think she'd have lied about the middle of the road part. But anyway, so kind of came out from her over the years because I came along later. My brothers were 16 and 20 when I was born, and so I was different for her. And so we were close and we were friends, and she talked to me a lot, and she would tell me how difficult it was, and she was really smart. I have deep respect for smart people stuck in uneducated bodies, as I've often called it, and because my mother was such an example of that. And my father, and I've written about that too, ended up being fairly alcoholic and was pretty abusive to her as well. She had kind of a tough life, but it started with her lack of education,
Yeah.
and that's what made it the hardest.
What was her mother like?
Her mother was I liked Ma Coates. I knew her when she was older.
Hmm.
She was kind of bouncing from house to house. I mean, I
Okay.
never knew her young. I do not
Yeah.
remember what she looked like before she had her whole ritual of putting her hair up and her bun at the back. And I mean, I was just fascinated by every piece of this. And she was kind of gruff, and Ma Coates and I really got along well. And I always kind of thought she was badass, considering that she was old. I think she would tell people that she had been 60 for over 20 years or something, it was that kind of thing. And she was an orphan, and I don't know enough about her family
Right.
as a result of that. I've been teasing around with this idea that she might have been on the orphan train some years ago. Speaking of history,
Mm.
I've never quite proven that, but that's something that had kind of passed by my radar. So I don't know much about her family life, but she and my mother were close. Now, by the time I really knew her, she was bouncing around between my mother, as the only daughter, had all these brothers, and so in Jackson and various places. I live in
Right.
Jackson now. So she was bouncing around, and so I knew her mostly, and she had this big schiffer robe, as they called them then. Do you
Hmm.
know what that is? The big
Hmm.
chest of
Hmm.
drawers and the whole
Sure.
thing, and all her little cubby holes.
Uh-huh.
I so wish I still had that thing. We'd all have to load up and move to the next place. And in some ways, I'm very much like her in
Uh-huh.
that with my stuff. But
We do get connected to things. I am.
we
I
do.
am
Oh,
sentimental. Yeah.
don't even get me started about me. But I never saw her inner self very much, I
Yeah.
think is one way to put
Right.
it, because she was older, but she had her rituals, which I'm kind of that way too. And, I think thinking back now, I think she was trying to control her environment however she could after
Best you
a
could.
probably a very difficult life.
Hmm.
But she liked us best, so she always wanted to stay with us. Yeah,
Well,
so
you were saying that she'd been 60 for a long time. It's interesting
yeah,
looking back at some of those old pictures, and
yeah,
like my great grandmother. I'll look at that and it's like, well, she must have been 60 or 70 or whatever, and she'd be like 40. I mean, they just
yeah.
they
Oh, I know.
it
They
was
they they aged
they
fast
did
in that sense, and a lot of them had hard lives. I mean, that was
absolutely.
certainly the case with
They earned that.
my mother and grandmother. Yeah, working in fields and
Hmm.
hunched over, and all of those things. Just in hot sun and picking cotton and
Uh-huh.
all these things that they did. I mean, they went through a lot. My mother had had breast cancer when she was young, and just they had to be very strong to get through it all.
You're talking about your mother getting married at 14. We have, and also talking about being sentimental, I have my great grandmother, she got married at 16. And we have the little note that her father wrote to, I guess, the Justice of the Peace that said, Sadie is my daughter and she's 16 and it's okay for her to get married.
Well, the dads were often giving the girls away in
Yeah,
many ways,
yeah.
I mean, it's just true,
Mm-hmm.
even in poorer families, maybe especially in some cases, and anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I've spent a lot of time on my genealogy, and there's a lot up in there when you really face it, head on.
Yeah, well, I was talking to somebody the other day who said, don't do your genealogy unless you've got tough skin and you can handle it because you're going to find some things.
Especially when you're from the deep
That's
south and
right.
you're white.
That's right.
Just, and I encourage people go in with both eyes open and you'll learn a lot. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
there's a lot up in there.
So the big thing, and you've mentioned it, your mother was illiterate, and you make your living writing. As we mentioned, founder and editor of the Mississippi Free Press, journalist. How did that come about? I mean, how did you get from being raised in, because your father was slightly literate, I think.
It's only slightly, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And he died when you were in third grade. Is that right?
third grade. Yeah.
So how do you and their parents were illiterate? So how did that happen that you are on the opposite end of that? Really?
um, to me, at this point in my life, I think it's kind of a two-pronged answer. One is that I could not have had a mother who valued education more than my mother because she didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my case, just how much she valued it and the things that she would do to ensure that I could afford things to go to school and to, and how passionate she was about that was certainly a big part of it. And then a kind of a direct thing was that when I didn't really know it because she kind of faked her way through it. Uh, I didn't know it till I was in the third grade, but she'd faked her way through it. So I would see her looking at magazines or looking at a book. I mean, she was ashamed that she couldn't, which was one of the difficult things. But
Mm-hmm.
so she faked her way, and she had memorized how to write her name because remember she's really intelligent, which you know, and so she could fake her way through things, but she couldn't fake her way through everything. And so after my father died when I was in the second grade, it was not long after that at all, like the start of the school year in the third grade. And I came home from Neshoba Central and I was all excited because we wrote cursive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when she set me down and she's like, sit down, I need to talk to you. And I'm in the third grade, right? And I'm like, what is happening? And so she sits me down and she says that she needed to tell me something. Now I'm in the third grade, y'all, and she's like, I just want you to know that I can't read or write. And I'm looking at her like, what? And she said, and so, and I'll never forget this. And she said, she said, so I'm going to need you to help me do my business. And because my dad had in the little bit that he could do, and he was smart too. So I expect, even though I don't have enough memory of it, that he had taught himself to do more than he had learned in school.
Mm-hmm.
Not,
Right.
trust me, wasn't sitting around reading novels, or we didn't have many books around when I was a kid, a little kid. So that's what she said. And so I was like, okay, I had no idea what do my business meant. So I'm like, what? So she did. I mean, I learned to write checks. She would come to me kind of secretly and get me to read things to her as I was able to and just do stuff. That's just the way it became.
Mm-hmm.
And we had these little code things where if somebody handed her something to read, I would grab it like I was precocious, which I
Right.
kind of was, but which came first, I don't know. But and I would grab it and start reading it to her,
Right.
reading it out loud, you know, and or things like that would happen. And so it was just it was our secret, because she was so ashamed of it. I think I've written any number of times that I kind of became her eyes and her s- somewhat. She was smart, but I was I could help her get things done.
Yeah.
And so I think it came from that, right? And then I also, because she did want me, like she bought, somebody came selling encyclopedias, so she bought me encyclopedias. Read them. Like, okay. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
we had
The
that
white,
same
well, we had
set,
the white ones and the
the
blue
white
ones.
ones with the greens,
Yeah. And
you
she
know.
couldn't afford both of them either. I'm
Yeah.
telling you. And then my brother, one of my brothers, who was, remember, was 16 years older than me, was the first person I he may have been the first cousin
Hmm.
to go to college. I can't swear that, but he would come home and bring me books.
Hmm.
So I can't take away from Ken the immense influence that it helped that and then he got married to my sister-in-law Sheila, who's still one of my favorite people in the world. And they would bring me books.
Hmm.
And, I people wanted me to be educated, and to read. And I was so curious. And so it just grew from there. I think some of it was that maturity that's forced on you in a way, because you have to do these things and keep the secret. So I
Yeah.
became I became quite shifty, which I think is, I use to my advantage to this day. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I think that's where it came from. And
Hmm.
then I was always mentor to mentor people who were, helping me. One of the biggest challenges was, and my mother, God, when she did her literacy test, she actually she told me something. And when she was actually learning to read and write in her 60s before she died, she she said to me that she was really upset. She got into a depression, and she said to me, when I had come home, I was living away, and she said, "I didn't know how much I didn't know."
Oh yeah.
And that is one of the most heartbreaking things
Hmm.
that it ever could be said,
Hmm.
that explains illiteracy, I think, because she just
Yeah.
didn't know how much she didn't know, and other people were helping me transcend that.
You were talking about how smart that she was, and I've said
Mhm.
that about my grandfather. He had an eighth grade education, which wasn't bad. I have his diploma. Again, keep all the things, and I also have. He was valedictorian of his eighth grade class, and so I have his little speech, and I think it would rival a lot of your, high school speeches today. But he was, with only an eighth grade education. I always said he was one of the smartest men that I
Oh,
knew, and he had the emotional intelligence. He worked well with people. He worked for the city in Philadelphia. He farmed, and he was just smart. And I learned a lot of things from him. And so similar, I think, to kind of what you're saying about your mom.
oh, well, that's it. I mean, I learned from a very young age that education and being intelligent are two
Absolutely.
different things. And so as a result of that, I think that I don't see the barriers
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that
Mm-hmm.
some other people can see. Now I believe wholeheartedly in education, and so did she. We had relatives around us who didn't care about education, that thought it was a bad thing. You get ideas in your head and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
we still have those things today.
Oh God, they're growing, I think. But right. And exactly. I learned that early. And that's the thing. It's like intelligence, and a lot of times intelligence, if people are curious and they think about things and they're encouraged to do that, I just think the sky's the limit,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I always say that, I write because my mother couldn't. And I just really mean that, because it meant so much to her
Mm-hmm.
that I needed to be able to do that and to help other people do that. As a result of it, as an adult and as a now a CEO who hires people and an editor and all these other things, I am known for finding people with more potential than education,
Mm-hmm.
and or quote unquote quality of education or whatever it is, because I really believe that if you figure out how to engage people and what they really care about and to expose them to things, then And that's what she taught me. That's the thing. Like she pushed me out into the world, and when she could have really used me at home,
Right.
you
Well,
know?
there was a conference I was at. It's been a long time ago, and they were talking about poverty and education, and how sometimes we assume, kids in elementary school, well, they can't learn. They're struggling
Uh,
with math. And this lady who had worked in that area for a long time, she says, and they're treated like they're dumb. They're not dumb. They don't know how to do the math in the way that you're talking to them about it. But if you ask that kid to figure out how much money they have to spend on the light bill as opposed to the water bill,
yeah,
they can do that math because they're the ones
yeah.
running the household in fourth grade. So it's not that they're dumb. It's just the learning has to match where
No.
they are.
Well, and the expectations, and I think that's what, that whole that old political phrase, bigotry of low expectations. I don't appreciate the context that originated in. However, there's truth in the
Mm-hmm.
words. That there is this real bigotry of low expectations that we have for others, and then that the psychology of that, I think, if people don't believe that they can do certain
Sure.
things, like, I run a youth media program, journalism program, and have now for 10 years. And some remarkable work comes out of that program. And it surprises people. It's like, they are winning, they win awards against, um, public school kids. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's a real mix of kids. I mean, some of them come from more privileged backgrounds than others, but we believe they can do the quality of work that they do and that we expect, and that they can take being edited and doing rewrites and all the things that you have to do to become a great writer. And they do. And so it's kind of the same thing. Is the reason I bring that up, is that we expect too little, and then we make assumptions about people's backgrounds. I mean, we do it in journalism as an industry, where we don't have nearly enough people who understand backgrounds like mine, and more difficult circumstances than mine, right? And and they just assume what a good education looks like. There are worlds that live in me, and i can I can be in a lot of different environments, but I am who I am. And I tried to get rid of my Southern accent years ago. When I was younger, I was so
Mm.
mad at the South. That's
Yeah.
just a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. Partially because of our hometown, let's just
Mm-hmm.
be honest. And part of when I came back, after 18 years, I was coming back. I came back, and it's almost like I reclaimed my heritage by moving back and doing what I do here. And it all stems from that whole, I don't know, everything that has ever happened to me and my mother and my grandmother are in me,
Yeah.
are in who I am now.
Maya Angelou said that she
Mm.
disagrees with Thomas Wolfe's sentiment that you can't go home again.
Mhm.
Um, she says that it never leaves you. That
No.
home goes with you. And then in the newest, a fairly new book, Kin,
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I
Terari
know about it.
Jones,
Yeah.
she talks about how the soil of your home follows you, and it draws you back. Do you find that is true, that that home kind of goes with you? Has it done that for you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think, like, I was kind of referring to kind of trying to leave it because I was
Yeah,
mad at it,
sure.
and for good reason.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just be honest. But and not just around race, and but also around being a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and the low expectations of what we can and should do. And so, when I left the day after Mississippi State, swearing I was never coming back, I really meant it. And then, long, 18 years later, I go to Columbia, I get my master's, I'm writing about Mississippi, coming back here to do reporting. Then I have, I like to say the homing device went off
Yeah.
in my head. And I kind of mean it. And it's like, I do. And I actually think that a lesson I've learned is that we should let that in, and we should let that breathe and be part of us. And I understand the difficulty of it when sometimes you have to leave to understand that better because it's too close here. And so I think that happened to me, and I know it happens to a lot of other people, where for one thing, you get out there and you find out it's not all that much better, even though
Yeah.
people pretend it is. They just don't talk about their stuff, and they talk about our stuff.
Mhm.
And I don't say that to downplay our stuff.
Mm-mm.
It's just true. And a lot of my work revolves around that. In fact, I'm writing a book that's
Mhm.
somewhat about around some of those things now. But but yes, it's in you, and it's like it's who you are. And now, as a writer and a writing teacher, an editor, etc., what I teach to people is that all of that is when you talk about voice. The last thing you ever should be doing as when you're trying to develop a writing voice is to sound like somebody else, right? It's like you you are everything that has happened to you and absorbed, and if you allow that to be the case, then if that is what drives what you create,
Mhm.
and how you look at the world. I mean, the best things I write are through fully my own lens, as a Mississippi woman who came from illiterate parents, who ran and came back, and all the stuff,
Mhm.
and the racism that happened around me, and how I responded to it, and how my mother responded to it. All of those things, they are my voice,
Mhm.
even if I'm not writing about those things.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we have to, it to be truly authentic people, and writers and creators. I think we have to fully allow ourselves to be everything that we are, the sum of our history, basically.
Talking about going home, I went to Philadelphia this past weekend because we still have my mom's house, property, all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and I go back regularly. And I went up to the cemetery, Henry's Chapel
Mhm.
Cemetery, and I walked around, and I don't know if you can see that or
Oh, you
not,
found my mama's grave.
but I found and that's your dad
And
also,
my
right? Your
dad.
mom, yeah.
And my dad.
Your mom
Mhm.
and dad's grave there. So our mothers are buried in the
That's
same cemetery, but I walked
wow,
around and
that's
looked for,
crazy.
yeah.
Wow, 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 wow. Yeah, yeah, that's and like I said, we didn't we all the lads, my
Uh huh.
dad and his brothers, somehow lads took over the
Yeah.
foreground there for a
Lads and
while.
Tingles and Hollies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That we were one of the
Uh
the big families, so
huh.
to speak.
Yeah.
Although now I've realized a lot of very wealthy people have kind of
Uh huh.
it's kind of remade back in there
Uh
in
huh.
ways that I didn't quite recognize
Mm-hmm.
it. But yeah, my sister-in-law still lives down there. I was just there a few days ago.
We're talking about race stuff, and one thing that surprised me a
Mm.
little bit is your mother influenced not just you becoming a writer, but she also influenced your focus with the racial
She did.
inequities. Yeah, tell me a little bit about that because that doesn't fit the stereotype, particularly for that time in that place.
No, and no, that's right. And I influenced her too. And so I'll kind
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
I'll mention that as well, which you probably read. But my mother was deeply, deeply compassionate, and deeply, she was very human. We always said that, well, I think she always said she never met a stranger, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true for me if I'm not like hiding out from people. And and so she knew all sorts of people. She worked at the Garin factory, and she was in love with Charlie Pride. I'd marry that man, and that was a shocking thing to say back in the 60s. And so and 70s. The thing that she said to me, like when I was very young, she would say to me, nobody's better than anybody else. And she always remember nobody's better than anybody else. And that's somebody telling you that everybody's equal,
Mm-hmm.
and that the whole arc of my work has been pretty much that, right? And this book, if I never push it out the door, is going to be largely about that as well, and not just in the South. But
Mm-hmm.
she really cared about people, right? Now, she was also growing up in an environment, and I've written about this, it's no secret, where she used the N word,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the simplistic way to look at that would be, well, first, horrible,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll get to that in a minute.
Right.
But the simplistic way of looking at that is like, well, that people would say, oh, well, your mother used the N word. She was racist. And the truth is, I know a lot about racism at this point because it's one of my specialties. And she's one of the least racist people I know because she didn't really, she honestly believed everybody was equal.
Mhm.
That was the language that the people uneducated and others around her were. It was a descriptor. I'm not excusing it at all. So I don't want anybody to take it that way. In fact, I set her down when I was, I'm guessing fifth grade from my
Mhm.
memory, but don't know. And I said to
'Cause
her,
you knew it all
Mama,
by then, right? So you were ready.
well, I was figuring it out. And I said, Mama,
Mhm.
you're gonna have to stop using that word.
Uh-huh.
And she never used it again,
Yeah.
because that is an ugly word. And anyway, and I probably said exactly that. That's an ugly word, and you can't say it anymore. And it was almost like she immediately understood that, right? And because she got it. And so I'm not going to, I tell that story. I don't have to tell that part, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
sure.
I tell that story to say people can change, but it's not just about, sometimes it's changing the way they communicate or changing the way that they were taught, but what's underneath them is what it really matters. And so they need people to help bring that out of them. And so my interest, I really started. I mean, there's a story I never forget it, but I don't know exactly when it happened. I was very young, and we were watching some movie that had a TV thing or something, and it might have been a western, and they were trying to lynch a black man, and I lost it. I mean, I was just, I just, I ran back, and I was like, it's maybe the closest I've ever come to a real panic attack. I mean, I was just like, I couldn't. My mother was washing my face with a washcloth,
Mhm.
and I'm like, I can't believe. And so it was kind of like I look back to my whole young life, and I remember just hating the racism around me.
Mhm.
It was like the more I was aware, I couldn't, and for me it was illogical. It's like, how can people think that
Mm.
people of a that have a different skin tone somehow are inferior? Never made sense.
Mhm.
And I was right, and all this actual science supports that. And as I learned over time, but it was like it made no sense. And then the hateful things I would hear, and I know I don't remember it all. Some of my own uncles, God bless them, call me an in lover as
Mhm.
a kid
Mm.
because I would say just anything that wasn't, you know, racist or
Right. Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
or I would say, or maybe I said, "Oh, you shouldn't say that," or whatever it was, and that just like made me madder. It's like I'm like, stop it. It's just, and I was so mad about it. And then long story short, I didn't know about the murders, from the civil rights murders until I was 14. That happened when I was 3, and I was really mad about that because nobody had taught me. And so it just became this snowball effect of what I was really interested in. And I think it goes back to her ultimately. It's because it's this, how wrong racism is, but also how wrong it is for people. You can hold two thoughts at once. I think
Mhm.
I learned that, right? Two thoughts at once. And it's so wrong, and it's also wrong for other people in other places to dump it all on other places.
Mhm.
And and I do not say that, and anybody's read my writing knows that I am not going easy on Mississippi or our hometown at all. But why it's still with us is because there's this naivete across the nation about what it really looks like everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's what I learned over time. But I think it was the way she helped me think. I don't know how else to put it, that she helped me think. And then she models somebody who would change.
Mhm.
I mean, imagine that in today's world.
So, one of my favorite TED Talks is called The Danger of a Single Story.
I think I saw it's been around for a
It's
while,
better.
hasn't it?
It's old. It's like
Yeah, yeah,
I don't.
yeah. That's what I
It's
thought.
old,
I
but
think I saw it a long
But
time
one of
ago.
the things that she says that so sticks with me is The problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, it's that they're incomplete.
No,
Because, I
yeah,
mean, you think
yeah.
about
That's what I'm
stereotypes of
saying. Yeah.
Mississippi, and we all
Sure,
know
they're
people
true.
that would fit
Yeah.
them, absolutely,
Yeah.
but they're incomplete.
Right.
And I think, your
Yeah.
mom, a country illiterate woman from Philadelphia, probably fit some of the things that people would think about that,
Yeah.
but it's
Of
totally
course. Of
incomplete because
course.
what they didn't know
Yeah.
was the things that you're talking about. That's not the whole story.
And then the other thing is that nobody ever probably ever said, "Don't say that."
Yeah, yeah,
And in some ways, it's just like to challenge something that people grew up with. People don't, a lot of people don't like that. Well, my career is based on
yeah,
doing that.
yeah. When you know better, do better. Yeah.
And she modeled that for me. It's like pushing me out there, and then I would come home and tell her things, and she would learn from them. That one thing wasn't the only one.
Hmm.
But yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Here's a real important thing I want to ask you about:
Okay.
the hair. A picture I saw a picture of the two of you that looked something similar to this, and it was probably
Oh
around the
yeah,
same
yeah,
time of you standing by your mom. Now, my mother's hair
yeah.
was not as tall, but if you look at this picture back here, as she got older, it got higher. But that one picture, your mom's, it was
My
high.
mom could rock a beehive. And but here's the rest of the story. I don't know if you know this, because I don't know if I've written this
Yeah,
part or
yeah.
not. Who knows? She wore those hair pieces,
Mm,
right? I don't know if your mother did that, but they would build that. She'd go to the beauty shop,
yeah, oh yeah. Once a
and
week,
they
they'd go to
build
beauty
those
shop.
hair pieces in there, and so that's why it
Uh
kept
huh.
this. And she dyed her hair until, I mean, probably sometime around my age. She dyed it jet black.
Hmm.
I mean, she actually had great style when I
Yeah,
actually think
yeah.
about it. But so she'd have that hairpiece up in there, and that hairpiece looked like a spider. If you saw it lying around, it looked like a big old spider. And so she would do that, and then by the way, my mother was actually one of the funniest people I've ever known, and so I think I also got my particular sense of humor from her. But she would to try to keep it in place at night, because you had to sleep on those things, because you
Yes.
didn't go back to the beauty shop for another week, right? She had these big panties, and so she would put a clean pair over her beehive at night, and then like pin it up and stuff, and that's what would like kind of keep her beehive in place. And then and I have some great pictures of her wearing panties on her beehive. But yeah, I mean, she really did.
Yeah,
She
that
had
hair
this
was
like really
important.
great
You
style.
did not
Oh
mess with
my god.
that. That
Oh
was.
my god.
They used to say the higher the hair, the closer to God. Was that?
That's right. That's right. And she had it. But I tell you, some of those, I couldn't go to the beauty shop with her very much so, because some of the things some of those women would
Oh,
say,
oh yeah.
I was like, "Okay, I'm not gonna go to the beauty shop, mama. You go ahead and go,
It's a,
because, I'm gonna hit somebody. I know you gotta get your hair did, but, you know,
you're on your
yeah,
own.
I cannot deal with these women."
Now, was she religious at all?
Not well, that's a good question. Not until later in life,
Hmm.
and we didn't talk about it much early on. And I was never forced to go to church. I kinda decided to for a little bit while I was a teenager, until at Good Hope Baptist Church, and then all this racist, sexist stuff happened, and
Hmm.
I was accused of trying to pick up an old deacon, and I'm like, "I am so out of here. I'm a kid." I'm like 14. I would call her now, I would call her kind of like I consider myself. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Hmm.
And I think that that was probably true for her too. Even in thinking about it, she was actually quite mindful, which she never would have known what that, really meant, I think. I think later in her life, she started going to a church there at Williamsville.
Yeah,
And I think she went because it was important for her to prepare for dying at some point. And I think she always thought, she died at 65, and I'm about to turn 65. And I think she thought it was, a lot of health issues in my whole family. So I think some of it was about that, was about that kind of, and I don't judge that at all. I mean, my take on my mother is that she didn't really, she she was a better person than most people I knew who went to church when I was growing up there. I can tell you that. I'm feeling you know what I'm talking about. But so it wasn't, I never had religion thrust on me, like never. So yeah, it wasn't a big part of her life until later.
I was on a panel talking about women in leadership, and one of the things we talked about was imposter syndrome. And they
Mm,
asked how many women in there had imposter syndrome. And pretty much everybody in that room, except for one woman, raised their hand. And she was
yeah.
like, "Why? Why would you? You know, y'all are all accomplished. Why would you have imposter syndrome? Have you ever experienced that?"
That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Yeah, I don't think I would have called it imposter syndrome, but I think so, yeah. I think when I left Mississippi, I probably went through some things around that could be called that, in the sense of just kind of having confidence early on to
Mm-hmm.
kind of believe I could do certain things. Now, I think that part of what I was facing that kind of brought out the imposter syndrome was there was so much BS stereotypes about people from Mississippi and who talked like I did. You know, I was working very hard then to get rid of my Southern accent, and I actually largely did. And now I've just got this accent that's all kind of, you know, it's everything from New York, you know, I talk New York Yiddish words to depends on who I'm talking to and all that. My mother had a lot of pride, and that got her through, I think. And I think I picked up on some of that, and at points to a detrimental degree, where I would hesitate to put myself out there sometimes early on because I did not want to be condescended to or treated in like I was lesser as a, you know, a white woman from the South. I could be, and I have been, and I mean, and I still am some now, but I don't,
Mm-hmm.
you know, now I know how to, you know, have a force field, and I know how to reject it. So I think that I never really thought of it as imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
but expect now that it was in a way because I wasn't good enough, and I get frustrated even to today at the barriers that are put up for women who are really good at what we do,
Mm-hmm.
like I am. I'm really at this point, I don't have the
Yeah, you
imposter
don't have that
part.
anymore. Yeah.
No, I don't have that anymore. Early lack of confidence about being able to kind of be in those other places and spaces and in other states. And then in the Ivy League, I actually went through a kind of a when I got my master's degree in journalism, I had there was this one class that quite literally sent me back to Mississippi
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of it. I kind of went to therapy to deal with the way this man dealt with me. As a result of that, I figured out that I actually wanted to come back to Mississippi. It was not running. So it was a good thing. So it wasn't like I was running from that, you know, that situation. It wasn't that at all, but it was like through just talking it out with this fantastic art therapist woman that, you know, it kind of lit this thing into me to kind of come back to Mississippi and do what I was really good at, and that's really what sent me back. So it's kind of the reason I say that in that little complicated arc there is that women still go through so much. It's almost like even if we don't feel like we are imposters, it's thrust on us that other
Yeah.
people think we are.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that at this point in my career, that pisses me off
Mm-hmm.
because it's not necessary, or they play games with you. Let's go back to it. This is how my mother inspires me, because it's like if she could do what she did, then I have really learned to turn lemons into lemonade. And that's what a message that I would like to send to women. It won't always be fair, right? And we got to fight that. We got to fight that on behalf of younger women because they just go through the same cycles.
So, as we wrap up, I want to ask you this question.
Okay.
As a journalist, if you were sitting down with your mother today and interviewing her, what would you want to know? Uh, what would you want to ask her and know about that you don't already know about her?
um well, the honest answer, I mean, what pops into my head is I think I would want to know more about the full range of abuse that she faced, including at the hands of my father. Because I think, I knew that he had cheated on her and some other things, and but it was past her death, and it took an aunt who was actually on her deathbed who told me some things about, how bad it really was. And I think she protected me from that even after he died, and so I think I would want to know more about that, and how, not just what happened, but how she got through that, you know? Yeah. I think that's what I would want to know.
Yeah. I don't think we've mentioned her name yet.
It was Katie Mae, well, Coates was her maiden name, and then Ladd, and then she had remarried my stepfather later in life, who she loved dearly. He was an alcoholic,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a whole nother round of
Yeah.
problems around that. And he loved her dearly, and he loved me dearly.
Katie Mae. That's a good Mississippi name.
Yeah, and I was Donner K. And what's funny is I use that now in social media. I outlawed my family calling me because they'd all call me Donner K. I mean, I'd get Christmas cards from Aunt in Florida addressed to Katie Mae and Donner K. And I'm like, would you people stop it? And so I hated it for so long.
Yeah, Donner with an R, right? We
Oh,
had
yeah, yeah. Like the reindeer.
my first cousin is Linda, but my mother called her Linder. We actually talked about that in the first
Oh,
episode.
yeah.
It
Oh,
was
yeah.
yeah, it
Oh,
was
yeah.
Linder this and Linder that.
Linder, always Linder. I mean, I'm still deciphering. It was always Osh potatoes, and
Yeah, Arsh.
I
Yeah.
guess that was Irish, but anyway, just the words. Oh, I tell Todd, my partner, who never got to the privilege of meeting my mother, but the way she would talk and her language was just, I wish I don't even think I have a recording, because, it was then and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have recordings like we do now. Yeah, she was so funny. That's the thing I want to just end this with. I mean, she was just the funniest person, and she loved life despite it all.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no better message than that, I think, to just try to squeeze everything you can. That's what I meant, that she was mindful,
Mm-hmm.
like she tried to live in the moment, and she was a great cook and never met a stranger. She was a character, not just the panties on the beehive. I mean, there were all kinds of things that she did. Yeah, I miss her every day.
Well, thank you for being here today. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you. This is really fun to get to talk about my mother for an hour is not something that happens very often.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. And listeners, thank you for joining us today. Every conversation is special in its own way, but this one is really hits home literally for me. So strikes a personal chord, and I hope that you have enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where you can be part of the conversation. I want to hear from you as well. And until next time, in the words of my mom, be patient, be kind, and be fair.